Hello everyone, I'm Ixalan, and we're in the midst of Rivals of Ixalan Limited Review Week here on my channel. We've covered cards in the other four colors so far in this Limited Review Week, talking about how good all of them are going to be in the new limited format. And today we're looking at green. I use a letter grade system to come up with, the grades for these cards. And if you want to know how it is I determine what grade these cards deserve, you can go in the description below and find a link to a video describing how I grade these cards. Now, let's go ahead and check out our first green card, which is AggressiveUrge, which for one generic and one green is a common instant that says target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn, draw a card. This isn't a great combat trick. The stats boost it gives isn't anything special for 2 mana. You can usually get +2/+2 for only 1 mana, so +1/+1 for 2 isn't great. It does have a cantrip, which is nice, but I think I'd rather just have a stronger combat trick. I don't think you want to run this in most green decks, and it will only make the cut when you're pretty desperate, which means it's a D. Next, we have Cacophedon, which is a 3 generic, 1 green mana, 2/5 uncommon dinosaur with Enrage. Whenever it gets dealt damage, you get to untap a permanent. 4 mana for a 2/5 is some pretty good stats. Not a ton of creatures can attack through that on turn 4, and I guess the Enrage trigger here is nicely flexible, potentially allowing you to ramp or allowing you to give your Cacophedon, which is an awesome name by the way, pseudo-vigilance, which is pretty nice with a creature this big. Thing is, most people will just take 2 and not let it get enraged. Why would they bother letting, blocking it and letting it untap? That's way worse for them. However, if you end up with some of the cards, mostly red, that help you trigger enrage, untapping this at instant speed could be fun. Overall, I'm kind of underwhelmed here, though. I think it's just a C. A nice big dino for turn 4 who can do a few things when enraged, but is mostly just a good blocker. Next, we have Cherished Hatchling, which for 1 generic and 1 green is a 2/1 uncommon dinosaur, and it says, when it dies, you may cast dinosaur spells this turn as though they had flash, and whenever you cast a dinosaur spell this turn, it gains. When this creature enters the battlefield, you may have it fight another target creature. Well, this card is exciting and does something really unique and is very cool design, on top of the fact that it does okay in the vanilla test and it has a relevant creature type. This is the kind of creature that your opponent really has to think twice about attacking into, since if you block with and trade with something and suddenly flash in a 3/3 to kill another 2/2, they're going to end up in a world of hurt. This is true when it attacks too, by the way. Your opponent is going to be fearful of blocking this if you have 3 or 4 cards in your hand, because any one of them could be a dinosaur ready to fight and kill their largest creature. I think a lot of time this card will really warp the way your opponent plays the game, especially if you are able to leave a little bit of mana up on their turn. I can definitely see scenarios where this basically does nothing other than be a 2 mana 2/1 that your opponent never blocks or attacks into, but that's pretty good. This also is a playable card in a 9 dinosaur deck, especially in game 1 when your opponent has no idea if you have enough dinosaurs for this to be a threat. They will still have to respect it and avoid killing it. I think it's a D in a non-dinosaur deck, but I think it's a great dinosaur payoff, one of the better ones there are, and I give it a B- for dinosaur decks. Next, we have Colossal Dread, which for 4 generic and 2 green is a 6/6 dinosaur at common with Trample. And here's the green card in the cycle of cards from Ixalan that they decided to reprint in Rivals of Ixalan. It may actually be slightly better here, as I think Dino Ramp looks to be better supported and the quality of removal is better, so actually getting to cast this guy is going to happen more frequently. But it was a C in Rivals of Ixalan, in Ixalan, and I think it's a C here in Rivals of Ixalan too. It's a nice top curve dino if you don't end up with any of the sweeter ones at higher rarities. Next, we have Crested Herd Caller, which for 3 generic and 2 green is a 3/3 dinosaur at uncommon with Trample, and when it enters the battlefield, you create a 3/3 green dinosaur creature token with Trample. This is a great card. 5 mana for 6/6 worth of Trample across 2 bodies is an excellent deal. It also works well with the Ascend mechanic, and obviously enough, it's a dinosaur. This is perhaps green's best uncommon. It can help you stabilize out of nowhere thanks to the 2 sizable bodies, and there aren't a ton of uncommons out there that can help you get back to parity from behind. I think it's a solid B, the kind of uncommon you'll start a lot of drafts by taking. Keep in mind you can play it in any green deck too. It's not the kind of card that you first pick and you're like, man, it's going to be like a D if I don't end up in the right color. Color, yeah, but if I don't end up in the right archetype. In this case, it's going to be good in any green deck, whether you're merfolk or dinosaurs. Next, we have Deeproot Elite, which for 1 generic and 1 green is a 1/1 Merfolk Warrior at rare, and it says whenever another Merfolk enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target Merfolk you control. This is a nice rare for a Merfolk deck. Obviously, it gets an F in a deck without enough Merfolk. It's sort of the opposite of the card we just looked at. This card's not going to be good unless you have a lot of merfolk. It's not the kind of card you want to take and assume it will be good no matter what. It's going to be horrendous if you're not a merfolk deck. But in a deck with 10 or more merfolk, it is going to make your merfolk huge thanks to all those counters. In a merfolk deck, I think this moves all the way up to a B-. I don't want to put it too much higher because it is just so small and easy to remove. But in games where your opponent can't do that, your board will end up out of control if you're a merfolk deck. It's the kind of card that in a really weak pack you can think about first picking because it has the ceiling of sort of a first pick power level card. But unlike the Crested dinosaur we just looked at, you're not going to end up playing it if you end up in dinosaurs. So it's one of those all or nothing kind of cards in this format. Next we have Enter the Unknown, which for 1 green mana is an uncommon sorcery, and it says target creature you control explores. You also get to play an additional land this turn. This card's kind of funny because it has what we all called an explore effect before the new explore mechanic existed. That is, letting you play an additional land, while it also lets you do the new explore effect, which is this new mechanic. This card isn't that far from actually being explore. How many times do you think I can say explore in discussing this card? But anyway, it costs 1 mana less, and it has a decent chance at drawing you a card. Explore just straight up draws you a card. If you don't, your creature gets bigger and you get some card selection. I'm a pretty big fan of the explore mechanic if you've been watching my videos, and this card seems solid. It can help you ramp in some cases and will always give you some value, especially for a single mana. It isn't a great card though. You have to have a creature in play for it to be at its best, and that is always kind of a nuisance for a 1 mana card. I'm going to start it at C. You'll play it in green decks, especially green decks that want to ramp, but I don't see it being a staple in green decks in this format. Though, I would be pretty happy if it turned out to be, and this just ends up being better than I think it is. I try to sort of temper my initial reaction to basically all cards with Explore, because I think I'm overrating all of them, so I think a C is a good place to start, but I could see it being better. I don't think it'll be worse, though. Next, we have Forerunner of the Herald, which for 3 generic and 1 green mana is a 3/2 Merfolk Scouted uncommon. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a Merfolk card and put it on top of your library. Whenever another Merfolk enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Forerunner of the Heralds. The Merfolk member of the Forerunner cycle, Forerunner of the Heralds, is good, just like the other cards in the cycle. A 4 mana 3/2 is a bad start, but it lets you search up your best Merfolk, or the one that's best in the situation, and put it on top of your library. That alone would be a pretty good card. So by your next turn it will at least be a 4/3, and it will likely just keep getting bigger. Merfolk have a few ways of making tokens too, which helps make this big even more quickly. This is a good payoff for Merfolk decks, but again, it's one of those all-or-nothing cards. It's an F in a deck without enough Merfolk, and a B- in a deck that has them. Like most of the Forerunner cycle, I think this is first pickable in weak packs, because if you end up in Merfolk, it is going to be one of the better cards in your deck. Next, we have Ghalta, Primal Hunger, which for 10 generic, that's right, 10 and 2 green, is a legendary creature Elder Dinosaur at rare. He's a 12/12 with trample, and he costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. This is another card with a neat design, and I think it's also quite strong. It isn't insane to imagine having 6 power on the board on turn 6 or so, at which point you can just drop a 12/12 Trampler for 6. Sure, he dies to a lot of kill spells, but damage isn't going to be taking him down. If you can drop a guy this large on turn 5 or 6, which again, honestly isn't a huge stretch, you are going to run over your opponent in a hurry. Now, it does have the downside of if you draw it and your board is small, you're just not going to be able to cast it in most situations. But I think the amount of upside it has, where you can pretty consistently, I would say, cast it on turn 5 or 6, and it's just massive and going to take over the game. I think it just has so much upside that it is first pickable, one of the bigger bombs in the format, and just an A. It does have downside, but I don't think it's significant enough to push it down from being an A. Next, we have Gilt Grove's Stalker, which for 1 generic and a green is a 2/1 Merfolk Warrior at common. It can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. This is a nice little 2-drop for green decks, especially Merfolk decks. It isn't anything more or less than that. It has a little bit of evasion going on, which gets to be better if you're dropping +1/+1 counters on it, but it's not a premier 2-drop or anything, just a solid C. Next, we have Hardy Veteran, which for 1 generic and 1 green is a 2/2 human warrior at common that has +0/+2 as long as it's your turn. This is another solid 2-drop that basically amounts to a 2 mana 2/4 during your turn, but because it doesn't have a useful creature type, it definitely loses some points in this world of tribal mechanics. It's another solid C, a green 2-drop you'll play, but you'll also cut a significant amount of the time. Next, we have Hunt the Weak, which for 3 generic and a green is a common sorcery that puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then that creature fights target creature you don't control. This is a card we've seen a lot of, especially lately, and as always, it's a solid removal spell. In this format, the Merfolk decks like doing things with +1/+1 counters, and the dinosaurs have Enrage, so it's kind of a cool card to print here because it works well with the 2 different green tribes, basically. Still, it has its problems, being sorcery speed and having the potential to get you completely blown out, since your opponent can cast removal in response, means you can't really cast this if your opponent has a fistful of hands and untapped mana. And that keeps this from being premium removal. It's good, you'll play a copy or 2 in most green decks, but it's just a C+. Next up, we have Jade Bearer, which is 1 green mana for a 1/1 Merfolk Shaman at common. And when it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on another target Merfolk you control. This card is another one that's just an F in a non-Merfolk deck, because you don't want to be running 1 mana 1/1s that do nothing. But it's okay in Merfolk decks. Being able to put a counter on one of your guys immediately when you play it is nice, but it isn't the kind of 1-drop you play on turn 1, obviously, because it's just not going to do anything, and its own body is just irrelevant. As far as Merfolk payoffs go, I think it is kind of underwhelming. I'm going to start it at C-, even in a Merfolk deck. Next up, we have Jadecraft Artisan, which for 3 generic and a green is a 3/3 Merfolk Shaman at common. And when it enters the battlefield, target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. This is a good common. A 4 mana 3/3 that pumps one of your creatures, +2/+2 for a turn, is powerful. This will frequently enable more effective attacks the turn it comes down, and the stats it offers after that aren't anything to scoff at. It further is helped by the fact that it doesn't require you to have Merfolk in play to be at its best, and by the fact that it is a Merfolk, so it fits well into the Merfolk deck. It will work quite well in any green deck, and I'm going to give it a C+. Next, we have Jade Light Ranger, which for 1 generic and 2 green is a 2/1 Merfolk Scout at rare, and when it enters the battlefield, it explores, then it explores again. You get to explore twice. I love Explore, and this card does it twice. A 3 mana 2/1 isn't great, but keep in mind that Explore makes it so it always is going to be better than that. It can end up as a 3 mana 4/3, or a 3 mana 3/2 that draws you a card, or a 3 mana 2/1 that draws you 2 cards. I love all of those options, and I hope I get to spend a lot of turn 3s casting this thing. Keep in mind, by the way, if all you're looking for is sheer size on your Jade Light Ranger, if the card you see on your first Explore is a non-creature spell, you can just put it back, and it's going to get those 2 +1/+1 counters and be a 3 mana 4/3. So that's pretty nice. This card's even better than just all of that is, though, because even in the late game it's relevant, as it gives you some card selection and card draw. It also has a relevant creature type. This is a very good card, one that is first pickable in the majority of packs, and I'm going to give her a B. Next, we have Jungleborn Pioneer, which for 2 generic and a green is a 2/2 Merfolk Scout at common, and when it enters the battlefield, it creates a 1/1 blue Merfolk creature token with hexproof. This is an excellent common. I think the best green one. We have seen many creatures like this before, 3 mana 2/2s who spit out a creature token, and this one makes one that has hexproof while also having all of the tribal things going on. Tokens are great for going wide and for helping you ascend, so this just brings a lot of value. I think it just barely sneaks into the B- range, like let's say with an 80, and is the kind of common you first pick in a weak pack. Take note that, while obviously this is better in a Merfolk deck, it definitely doesn't require Merfolk to be good, so you can play it in your dinosaur deck too. Next, we have Knight of the Stampede, which for 3 generic and a green is a 2/4 human knight at common, and it makes your dinosaur spells cost 2 less to cast. Now all 3 colors in the Dino tribe have a creature that reduces the cost of your dinosaurs. The other 2 are in Ixalan, not in Rivals of Ixalan. But yeah, this one is quite good. A 4 mana 2/4 is a little below rate, but it is decent stats, and it is a common that makes your dinosaurs cost 2 less. This is really going to enable dinosaur ramp decks and be one of the key commons there. If your deck has no dinosaurs in it and you're just desperate for a playable, you could do worse. I'd say you can put it in your deck and give it a D-. But I think dinosaur decks are going to really be interested in getting 2 to 3 of these, and I think it's a B- there. Next, we have Naturalized, which for 1 generic and 1 green is a common instant that says destroy target artifact and enchantment. We looked at Negate earlier this week, a constantly reprinted card, and also Shatter, and now we are looking at the green card that has been reprinted like a million times, and that is Naturalized. In most formats, it isn't worth mainboarding, and that's still true here. There are a decent number of enchantments running around and a few artifacts, so I don't think it is a complete F to mainboard. It's like a D if you really need to put it in your deck, but it is a nice sideboard card, and one you want, one of, in basically every draft you are green. It offers flexibility since it destroys 2 card types, not something all sideboard cards can do. I think it's a C+ out of your sideboard. Next, we have a Rozka Frillback, which for 2 generic and 1 green is a 4/2 dinosaur at common. Well, in Ixalan we had Frenzied Raptor, which was this same exact card except it was red. 3 mana 4/2s hit hard, and this has a useful creature type. You'll play it in dinosaur decks, but you'll cut it when trying to get down to 23 cards a significant amount of the time. I think it's just a C-. Next, we have Overgrown Armas, which for 3 generic and 2 green is a 4/4 dinosaur at common, and it has Enrage. When it gets damaged, it creates a 1/1 green sapling creature token. A 5 mana 4/4 doesn't offer the best stats, but the fact that this starts spitting out sapling tokens when it is damaged is pretty good. In a lot of situations, though, it is basically a 5 mana 4/4 that makes a sapling token when it dies, but that's not a bad thing. That's like a C. I don't want to go much higher than that because, yes, it is good when you have repeatable ways to trigger Enrage, but not that much better. Saplings are nice, but not exactly a game-breaking Enrage trigger. I'm just going to give it a C. Next, we have Path of Discovery, one of the cards I'm most excited about in this set, which is 3 generic and a green for a rare enchantment, and it has, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it explores. I'm going to have a hard time not overrating this card, and a hard time not first picking it every time I see it. My love of Explore is well documented, even just within this video, and this card makes it so all of my creatures explore. I mean, automatic A. Okay, I'm kidding. That's what my heart wants to give it, but my brain won't let me do that. This is a 4-mana enchantment that does nothing immediately, putting you at risk to get completely wrecked by your opponent's board on their next turn. But once you are allowed to untap and start playing creatures, this is a powerful engine that will win you the game in the long run. So basically, it's scary to play on turn 4 against a lot of opponents, but if you manage to survive that turn with a decent amount of life, as well as with a few creatures in your hand ready to explore, you're going to be in good shape. This format is too fast for me to get too excited about playing this ultra amazing card and giving it the A that my heart wants to give it. So I'm going to give it a C+, while desperately hoping that this format turns out to be enough slower that it pushes into at least the B range. Next, we have Plummet, which is 1 generic and 1 green for a common instant that says destroy target creature with flying. Another reprint. This is always a decent sideboard card. There are a decent number of flyers in this set, especially in the dinosaur and pirate tribes, so mainboarding this isn't bad, and you'll do it when you're desperate, so it's like a D there. It is a C out of your sideboard, as against opponents with 5 or more flyers, it becomes a Doomblade. It is one of those sideboard cards that, in an ideal world, you'd like to have one of every time you are in green. Next, we have Raptor, which for 6 generic and 2 green is a 5/5 mythic rare dinosaur with Enrage, and when it's damaged, it creates a token copy of itself. An 8 mana 5/5 is awful. When it gets damaged, it does make copies of itself, which means you can end up with a lot of these guys in play, and it also means that it can just trade with something and then shoot out another token. But your opponent can also just cast a kill spell on it that costs a lot less than 8, and then you're really in trouble. I think this card is a cool design, but 8 mana is a ton, and I just want more than this for 8 mana. I think this is an F. This format is going to be fast, maybe not as fast as Triple Ixalan, and the only 8 drops worth playing are the ones that just win you the game, and I just don't think this card does that a significant percentage of the time. Next, we have Strength of the Pack, which for 4 generic and 2 green is an uncommon sorcery that puts 2+1/+1 counters on each creature you control. This effect is powerful, no doubt about it. A permanent stats boost for your whole team is going to make your guys frightening. Green isn't great at swarming the board, with blue-green being the more likely home for this as it more frequently makes creature tokens than dinosaurs do. 6 mana is a lot, but I think this has an effect worth 6 mana. Granted, it is horrible if your board is small, and it can be a really bad top deck in the late game. And that's some definite downside. But in decks with 15 or more creatures, this isn't a bad card to have at the top of your curve. I'm going to start it at C because between the setup costs and really only being at its best in the blue-green color pair, it's hard to want to take it early. Next, we have Swift Warden, which for 1 generic and 2 green is a 3/3 Merfolk Warrior at uncommon. It has Flash, and when it enters the battlefield, target Merfolk you control gains hexproof until end of turn. I like this card a lot. A 3 mana 3/3 with Flash is already probably like a B-, as it isn't really that hard to flash it in and eat a 2/2, but this comes with the added upside of being one of the relevant creature types in the set while also being a payoff for that creature type. You can flash this into play and save one of your Merfolk from removal, which is great. So you basically have 2 options here that really hurt your opponent. Flashing it in to block something small or to save a Merfolk from removal. Either way, you're going to be getting a 2-for-1. And you generally won't get to do both of these things with this card. If you could, that would be great. The only time when that'll happen is if you get really lucky and your opponent declares their attackers and then casts an instant speed removal spell on one of your blockers, and then you're really in business. But people don't normally do that, and will be even less likely to do so in a world where Swift Warden exists. This is a B- in a non-Merfolk deck and a B+ in a Merfolk deck. The fact that it is good in all decks means it's a solid first pick, because you don't even need Merfolk synergy for it to be good. Next, we have Tender Shoot Dryad, which for 4 generic and 1 green is a 2/2 Dryad at rare with Ascend. And at the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 green Sapperling creature token. Sapperlings you control get +2/+2 as long as you have the City's Blessing. So this is a tiny version of Verdant Force, and that's a good place to be. A 5-mana 2/2 that makes a 1/1 Sapperling every upkeep, note it's not only your own, would already be a pretty good card. But this comes with the Ascend mechanic and becomes a Sapperling Lord once you have the City's Blessing. Worth noting, too, that it helps you obtain the City's Blessing itself by spitting out Sapperlings, so it puts your opponent under a ton of pressure. Ending up with the Blessing by your next turn really isn't a stretch thanks to the 2 Sapperlings that will have been made by then. This card is a solid B, and a good card to start the draft with. The only reason I don't want to give it a higher grade is because it dies to everything. Chances are you're going to get at least 1 Sapperling out of the deal, but it just dies to everything. And that is a problem that this card has. It keeps it from being a bomb, I think, because it's so easy to kill. But a B is a good place to be. It's a great card to start your draft with. If your opponent doesn't kill it, well, you're just going to win the game. Next, we have Thrashing Brought, which for 1 generic and 2 green is a 3/4 dinosaur at uncommon, and you can sacrifice it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. You have to pay 1 mana as well. A 3-mana 3/4, who also happens to be a dinosaur, is already going to be a good card, but this comes with the added ability to blow up obnoxious artifacts or enchantments. And there are enough of those running around that the fact that this can do that will come up at least once, probably, every time you draft it. Letting you get rid of pesky cutlasses, aura removal spells, and problematic vehicles is some upside, and a creature with great stats comes with it. This is a B-, another card that is just good in any green deck, making it a safer early pick than some others. Next, we have Thunderherd Migration, which for 1 generic and 1 green is an uncommon sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, you reveal a dinosaur card from your hand or pay 1. So this is the other tribes all have creatures that cost less if you reveal a certain thing. The dinosaurs decided to have a ramp spell that costs less if you're able to reveal a certain thing. And this is basically rampant growth. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tap, then shuffle your library. So this card in a dinosaur deck is pretty great because it's rampant growth, which is a good card. It fixes for you, it ramps for you. It gets you to 4 mana on turn 3, which is a great place to be when you're playing a bunch of dinosaurs. If you're not playing a dinosaur deck, though, this turning into a 3-mana spell makes it a lot worse. You will play it if you're desperate for fixing, say you're a Merfolk deck and you're splashing an off-color bomb. You will play it if you're desperate for fixing. You'll probably have 1 or 2 dinosaurs, too, and maybe you'll get lucky. It's probably like a D there in the Merfolk deck. But in the dinosaur deck, I think it's a really important card. I think it gets at least a C+. This is because it helps you ramp, which is one of the things dinosaurs really want to do, and it helps you fix. And an ideal dinosaur deck probably runs all 3 colors, the Naya colors, so that they're running all the best dinosaurs. So Thunderherd Migration is a good card for the dinosaur deck. I don't recommend taking it early because there's only really 1 deck in the whole format that wants it. So it'll probably come back if no one else is really into dinosaurs. But it is a good card for the dino deck. Next, we have Wayward Swordtooth, which is 2 generic and a green for a rare dinosaur who's a 5/5. It has Ascend, and it says you may play an additional land on each of your turns, and it says it can't attack or block unless you have the City's Blessing. This is an interesting and somewhat difficult card to evaluate, but my initial reaction is that it isn't very good. 3 mana for the ability to play an extra land each turn doesn't seem amazing. Sure, it is supposed to synergize well with Ascend, because the more lands you play, the closer to Ascending you get, but it isn't like this helps you draw additional cards. At some point, the ability to play more than 1 land a turn becomes irrelevant, since you are only playing lands you draw. Sure, this helps you ramp a little bit, and in the late game can finally jump into the fray, and if you play it in the late game, it's nice that it just has a huge body that can probably attack or block, but the downside here is too much for me to want to play this most of the time. I'm going to give it a D, acknowledging that I might play it in a dinosaur ramp deck, and maybe, it's also not bad in an Explore deck, because Explore decks are going to see more lands than most people as well, but it's not a card I love. I'm going to avoid it for the most part. Next, we have World Shaper, which is 3 generic and a green for a 3/3 Merfolk Shaman at rare. And it says, whenever World Shaper attacks, you may put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. When World Shaper dies, put all land cards from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. This is another card that presents us with a unique and interesting design. A 4-mana 3/3 isn't great, but World Shaper isn't interested in being around for very long. Instead, it wants to help you ramp. If you mill the top 3 cards of your library, there's a good chance that at least one land got milled, and there will be occasions where even more get milled. It also works pretty well with Evolving Wilds. Then, the ideal thing to do with the Shaper is just block and trade with something, which should ramp you up at least 1 mana in most situations. And that's a pretty good deal. It's technically a 2-for-1, right? Especially if you're in a deck looking to play huge creatures in the late game. This is a Merfolk, but is probably going to be better suited to Dino decks with higher curves. It does ask a lot of you, and there will be times when you have 0 lands in your graveyard, and this is just a 4-mana 3/3, which isn't the worst thing ever, but it's also definitely not good. So it isn't a card I love or anything, though I do love the design. I think I'm just going to give it a C, with the caveat that if Dino Ramp is a more viable archetype in this format, it could get even better. Well, that's the last green card in this video. We've looked at all the green cards. We've looked at all the single-colored cards in Rivals of Ixalan now. Tomorrow, I'll be back with all the remaining cards in Rivals of Ixalan. That is the multicolored cards, the artifacts, and the lands. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so others can enjoy it too. If you want to see the rest of my limited review, including the video tomorrow and future Rivals of Ixalan draft videos, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.